Rock, and we all love to hear about Split Rock from Rich. And today he's going to talk about Solvay Process and Split Rock. Thank you. Here's Rich Miller.
All right. You've been here before, so hopefully you know more about Solvay Process. I was just going to concentrate on Solvay Process and Split Rock, but Solvay Process comes to Syracuse 1881. They developed a process of making soda ash using the Solvay Process. It's a Belgian process, and it's under license from the Belgian company, the Solvay brothers, and the Semet brothers are very involved with Solvay Process. And as you probably know, Semet Solvay is the company that was running Split Rock during the explosive period, but before that, it was actually Solvay Process. They're really the same company, but it's just a matter of a fine definition. This is the logo for Solvay Process. I don't know why they came up with an anchor. That's one of the things I could never figure out. But they have the big S, and that's for Solvay. That's their trademark. But where the anchor comes from, I don't even know if that's part of the Belgian company Solvay that has the same logo. But what happens now, Split Rock, if the last lecture, Split Rock was a quarry run by a lot of individual families, mostly Irish, and Solvay Process is now coming and take it over. They need the limestone for the calcium to produce their soda ash. The brine will come from Tully, which is something else they take over. But they're starting to buy up property in 1890. Now, even when they took over, they still called their quarries by the old names that the families had. Degdon, or Filer, you had Crowley, Shanahan. This is the Leddy Quarry, which sometimes was owned by the Whedon family. That's why you get the name Whedon Road. Just to give you a perspective, Undug Road's over here. Split Rock Road's along the bottom. Here's Cedar Vale, makes that turn. And then Casson Road is over on the western side. But even when it was a quarry, the Auburn and Syracuse Electric Railroad Company built a trolley line through this gulf that went to Syracuse. It came from Auburn up through Marcellus, up to Hollet Hill area, crossing Casson Road and into Split Rock. Now there are twofold reasons for that. One is to bring workers to the quarry because you're dealing with people who are underpaid. They got basically half the wage that any other quarry got, and that's why there were a lot of strikes. Even during the Solvay Process days, there's lots of strikes. Now, you read a book, Smokestacks Allegro, there was never a strike at Solvay. Well, yeah, there were plenty of strikes, and they're very brutal strikes at the quarries. So there are various features I'll talk about. One is this cable road that goes from Solvay, Split Rock Quarry as it was called, all the way to Solvay Process in the village of Solvay. There was three different stone crushers. One is at the base of this ledge here that was built in 1881. Then you have one built in 1903 and another one just to the west in 1908. And I'll show you close-up pictures of that. But just to give you a perspective, they're basically built along this same line that goes over the Solvay Process. And really, they got out of the dimension stone. They were using the stone originally for buildings. Now they're basically breaking it up. They just want to crush it and use it for the soda ash operation. This is how Split Rock begins when Solvay Process moves in. This is a ramp with no guardrail. And the horses back up here and drop stone into this crusher that was built in 1881. Now this crusher, and maybe I'll show you what it looks like down below. There's the ramp. This crusher wasn't built by Solvay Process. This stone foundation still exists to this day. This crusher was built by the owners of that piece of property, the Hughes brothers. The Hughes brothers are like the last dimension stone quarrymen at Split Rock. The last stone that comes out of this quarry, the Filer Quarry, which is now the Hughes Brothers Quarry, is used to build Syracuse's City Hall. But now they also get a contract with Solvay Process because their company starts in 1881. They built a stone crusher. Basically, they dropped the stone in here. There's machinery to ground it up. And originally, they just had wagons carry the stone over to Solvay Process. Later on, they had a special wagon. It was huge steel wheels, which helped create a road by itself because it basically looked more like a steam roller, and they would use the stone that way. But Solvay Process, being a vertical company, said, why should we pay anybody a profit to get stone that we need so desperately? Let's take over the property. Now, it doesn't matter it was owned by somebody else. They come in, and what they do, and these are actually, I should point out, these are the quarrymen that start the operation. This is Ed Foley, he's chief superintendent of the quarry. This is assistant quarry superintendent. His name is Bill Foley. Their sister, I believe it's Augusta Foley, is the schoolmaster or mistress of the schoolhouse. And their cousin, Father Foley, is runs the church on Split Rock Road. So they kept it a very close knit organization. So these two guys come in. This is the only quarry master that Split Rock ever had. He also goes on to work at Jamesville when Solvay Process moves out of Split Rock and goes over to Jamesville. And this is the building that they were staying at. This is the company office. And you can see in 1890, Solvay Process gets the idea, instead of carrying the stone all the way by wagon, let's build a bucket line. You can barely see it here, but these buckets are basically like an alpine ski lift. They're carrying the stone. You notice it ends here. This is the stone crusher. This is the ramp that I was showing you earlier. It picks up the stone, carries it to this traction station, which basically begins the operation of moving the stone over a cable line, and it moves it over to Solvay Process. Basically, the gravity of the buckets going over the hills helps motivate or propel the bucket line. And over here is the quarry superintendent's house. I just showed you the quarry superintendent. So Solvay starts building up this property. The only problem is they don't own this property they're building on. And that's not a problem to them because they convinced the state that this is really a railroad. And they have eminent domain and they can take over any property they want. Big lawsuit ensues. It goes on for 2 years. Basically, what happens is it's not a railway because it's for private use. They originally told the state people were going to ride on this bucket line, and it was just for stone. So the Solvay Process loses its case, except it costs the Hughes brothers so much money, they had to sell the property to Solvay Process just to get out of it. And the Hughes brothers had been in the stone business at Split Rock since 1850. Now this is what Solvay Process does with the quarry. They build, these are elevators. Basically, a wagon can go in here and it lifts it up to the next ledge. There's another one back here. They start building all these little tracks to carry the stone where the horses were backing up to this ramp. Now they have these little cars, almost like coal cars, and they go over to the ramp to dump into the quarries. Now there's one here that I can't explain, and then this is the one I was showing you earlier. It dumps down this ledge into the old 1881 stone crusher, and then picks it up onto the cable road and takes it over to Solvay Process. And they always refer to that bucket line there as the cable road. Later on, they get better ideas to transport stone within the quarry besides using these buckets. Now these are these railroad cars. Now these are just pushed out by men because it's cheaper to do than by horses. And these are coming out of the digging quarry here. And basically, they start out just like in the old quarry days. They're doing everything by hand. They're blasting the stone. They don't care to cut the stone for building blocks. They're just blasting, creating rubble. Men are carrying the rubble by these wooden wheelbarrows and taking it over to a wagon, dumping it in, actually lifting it out of the wheelbarrow into a wagon to take it over to the stone crusher. Very labor-intensive work. Then they get the idea, why do all that? Why not create a bucket line, very much like the tramway they have over the Solvay Process? So then they create a small bucket line to take the stone from the quarries to the stone crusher. Now this is probably Canada Hill, and these are the buckets. They just load them up, and this bucket line first begins as a steel contraption, and then it goes over to the stone crusher on cables. But you can see this is like a transitional thing. There's a wagon back here still carrying stone by wagon. There's another wagon back in here, you can barely see it. So they're doing two operations. They never got rid of the old equipment. If it still worked, they used it. It just helped supply the quarries. Plus, they started electrifying the quarries. These are lamps, so they can work at night if they have to. But the men typically didn't work more than 16 hours a day. They kept it down to that. But they did have to work Saturdays. And Sundays they got off. Supposedly they go to church, but it doesn't really work out that way. They usually spend Saturday night in jail sober enough. But anyway, the intent was they could go to church. That's why Solvay Process actually built St. Peter's Church on Split Rock Road, so the people could go there. Plus, they also built the school on Split Rock Road to educate the young children.
Rich, what year was that?
Oh, this is hard to tell. None of these pictures are really dated, but this would be early. This is probably like 1900. A lot of the bucket lines that they had, this is what we call bucket line, as opposed to the cable roll that goes into the Solvay Process. The cable roll is 1890, but the bucket lines seem to start about at least 5 years after that. And it's hard to tell because there aren't that many maps of Split Rock. This is one of them. This one's actually from 1901. And here's the cable road that goes over the Solvay Process, 3.5 miles. This is on Duggar Road. Then you have your stone crushers here, and then you can barely see it, but these lines going out, these are the bucket lines carrying the stone from the quarry. Like this is Crowley Quarry. It carries it into the stone crusher. This is Leddy Quarry. There's a bucket line that carries it into the stone crusher. So they all meet at the stone crusher. Then at the stone crusher, after the crushing operation, the stone's put on a bigger bucket to take it over the Solvay Process. Now this will expand. These maps change. In a few years, there's another bucket line that goes over here to the Shanahan Quarry. And then they get rid of the Leddy Quarry bucket line, basically because it goes across this gulf, and I think there's a lot of tension on the line, and I think they had a lot of breakage. So this Leddy Quarry doesn't last very long. So Canada Hill doesn't get quarried as much as the area back here between Smorrel Road and Casson Road. Mainly the Shanahan Quarry is now under the Tripoli landfill, and the Crowley Quarry is still as bare as it was when they left the area in 1911. But there's always this little dip in the road too, by the church. The church is there, and then the schoolhouse, I think it's this one right here, those little dots there. And this is a close-up of the quarry. Here you can see the Crowley branch. Here's the Leddy branch going up to Canada Hill. This area here is a big deep gulf, about I'll say 80 feet deep at least. But also, as they're building, commercial stuff, there's a barn down here for the horses. Here's the old stone crusher down below. This one actually shows the new stone crusher, but this is a 1901 map. This actually wasn't completed to 1903, so either they had a temporary operation there or they were planning for the new stone crusher. But also along Gulf Road and then over Whedon Road, they're building houses for the workers. And they did this as well along Split Rock Road. And this and you can't really see it, this property line actually came straight down. See, it says Augustine. This went up here. Well, Solvay Process, not only did they buy property for the bucket line, because after all, they couldn't use them at the domain, they ended up buying the property from the owners. But they also, on this property that used to be Augustine, they put up the company houses. Now, things progress. They find out the old stone crusher they have is not adequate. And in fact, Split Rock wasn't the only supply of the limestone for the Solvay Process. They were actually getting stone from Janesville Quarry when it was owned by the Dunlops. They were getting quarry stone from Manlius when it was owned by Elvord. So they need more stone. The Solvay process is such a big thing that they have to get more and more stone. So they decide they're gonna build a bigger stone crusher up here in direct line of the old cable road. Now this is a terminal building for the bucket line. This is the bucket line that came in for the Crowley quarry, comes into here, and then there's another bucket line that takes it over to Solvay Process. So right here, where you see this deer arc, you can barely see it, they're building a new stone crusher. And this is a close-up. So they're actually building a stone crusher using the foundation stone as limestone, because you can see they have plenty of it. So why use something else? They start using the limestone that's already there, and they start progressing, putting up the stone crusher. Yeah. So here's the base. Now you see these little things that look like windows. Those are gates. Basically, the stone will be crushed, and you'll see it later. It'll come down trommels, and the stone is actually diverted to the outside of the crusher. These are gates, so as they pull the buckets in by hand, they open up these gates and fill up the buckets with stone, and then just haul, use the hauling cable, take it over to Solvay Process. So it's very much like a meat market. They just pull things in, fill them up, ship them out, attach them to the bucket line, and away they go. Now, the kind of machinery they needed to crush the stone were these Austin equipment stone crushers. They had 2 units on top of the stone crusher. You can get an idea how big they are. But here's also the bucket line. It's still in progress because they never stopped operation. They just managed to maneuver things and get things constantly going. They never stopped for any reason. Now this is actually Wheaton Road. They're coming into the quarry. And this is them coming down Wheaton Road. These are actually the company houses here. You're looking north on Wheaton Road. On the boulevard now is right, left to right in the picture. So they're making the turn at what will become the old trolley line, which later became Monongalia Boulevard.
What year did trolley line go in?
It goes in 1903. It's very much after this. I'll show one picture of it. Because this stone crusher, they completed in 1903 in February. The trolley line comes immediately after, and I forget if it's in the summer or in the fall. I think it was in the fall of 1903. They finished the trolley line. The trolley line actually was an operation from Auburn to Skaneateles, but when Solvay Process needed, the trolley to bring in workers, the company says, oh, we got money to make here, and so they continued it right into Syracuse. And it actually became one of the most profitable trolley lines of all the interurbans that were created at that time. But here you see the actual stone crushing machines are on top of the stone crusher here. And what will happen is this is the base. This base actually still exists. All the stone still exists to this day. But you'll see they actually put a building on top of it. Here, they're progressing a little bit further. You see the men, how big this thing is. The men are up here. There's the man up here. You can see how big those stone crushers are. And again, they're pouring the stone right there in place. This is the old terminal building that they're still using because they need to bring in the stone from the quarries and then transport it over to Solvay Process. This shows a little bit better completion of the quarry, the stone crusher in the quarry. And this is a picture. They're so proud. They're standing here. Here's a guy standing up on top of it. I don't know how he got up there, but this is kind of scary because this looks like temporary like sawhorses, and these guys are sitting on it, and this guy's standing on it. I think there's actually 2 guys standing on it up here. And you can see the derricks in place because they're cutting the stone here and they're just hauling it up and building it.
What powered the crushers?
It was actually, it's steam powered. That's why down in the Gulf, next to the old crushing, the old stone crusher, they built a power plant to create, they have coal boilers, they create steam, and then they're they're pumping the steam up to these crushers to turn the turbines. Again, a little bit further on, you still see the terminal building. The buckets are still coming through, and then they're being transported down to Solvay Process. This is like the last scene. These are the trommels. These actually help sort the stone. When the stone comes out of these stone crushers, it goes through these trommels, it turns, and the stone actually is automatically separated by size. And you can see they're starting to build the foundation to the wooden building. There's like a 4-story wooden building that goes over these crushers, which is long gone. But you can see it's winter, so obviously the photographer didn't want to come out anymore, because the next picture they have, it's done. So obviously, you know, it's now spring. They completed this in February. There's still on the ground. Here's the old terminal building. But now, instead of the buckets going through this building, they're coming into the stone crusher. They're being dumped directly to the stone crusher, and the stone is separated. You can see the trommels are working. It's separating the stone by size. So when they need a certain size stone, they just open up those gates. They were inside the stone crusher, and the buckets are filled up. They connect it to the traction line, take it over to Solvay Process. And again, you can see poles here. There's telephone poles. I mean, they're in constant communication with Solvay Process in case there's any problems. They're in communication with the quarries. I'll show you some of the quarries in just a second. Again, another view of the stone crusher. We're looking westward. You can see the buckets coming in, one after the other. I think there were, I forget. It's in the book. They're, I don't know, 50 feet apart. It's in the book. And then they still have the elevator, so they can go from one level to the other. And then here you can barely see this thing here. There's a fence that will be built here, but this here is piping. This is the steam pipe carrying the steam up to the stone crusher to run the stone crushing units. And again, another view. Now they're getting ready to build these towers to take the stone directly from this stone crusher to Solvay Process. So they're building these towers that continue the cable road from the old stone crusher to this crusher. And again, you see the buckets are coming in. They're also building conveyor belts, because now the stone separates, but you only can have so much stone that piles up here. So now they have to divert it and take it away from the crusher. So they have a conveyor belt coming out, and these continue, and they keep adding on to it. This whole area will become stone. Now, what they also do, because it will become very hard to walk through this quarry with all the stone, they have a tunnel underneath the stone, and that tunnel still exists to this day. Again, another view of it, telephone line. And you can see this is basically a 4-story building if you count these two pieces up on top here. Now, because the quarries need workers. Now, before, basically the workers they used up at the quarry lived on site. There were families, there were residents there. Now they need basically 300 workers, but they also need a way of getting to Split Rock. So the Auburn and Syracuse Electric Railroad Company builds a track through the Gulf, and this is now the end of Onondaga Boulevard. And this is actually the hill that goes up to the stone quarries. And you can see the company houses are already here. There's one there. You can really see it. I got another view. This shows more of the company houses. They also have the Split Rock Station. Basically, you see these things. There's a couple. There's one on Falls Road, I think. There's one on Route 5 going into Elbridge. These are the little train stops, which, with the number of workers they have, really don't work out. And they'll end up building a clubhouse where they have ticket sales. These things, anybody know what these things are for?
Cattle.
Yeah. So the poor animals don't end up on the tracks, yeah.
So where does that end up downtown?
This actually goes down, it's on Duggan Boulevard, and then it makes a turn at,
It comes down West Duggan Street.
yeah, it goes,
Right
it
across
goes,
the
it makes a turn down to,
Granddad?
no, this is on Duggan Boulevard. This,
Where does it turn?
it turns, when it gets close to Bellevue, it goes down the
Oh.
hill. Now, is it Bellevue Hill it goes down? It makes it,
No,
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 no.
it comes out West Onondaga Street and comes, the old trolley line and comes right up past my house.
Yeah, but when it gets into the city, it makes one turn. It
It's
goes-
way down,
Yeah, way down, that's what I'm talking about.
way down.
Yeah, you're way into the city, it makes a turn down to Grace Street, and then it turns again by the Grace Street Church. There was a trolley accident there. It was kind of a strange thing. The trolley guy, there's all kinds of weird accidents at Split Rock, and most of the bad news about Split Rock is what gets in the paper. The good news never goes in the paper. It's like today, you always hear plane crashes. You don't hear people, being happy on planes. They don't do those stories. But one of the accidents at Grace Street was the motorman of the trolley is playing a game by balancing himself off the rear platform. Well, he goes too far and falls off. Well, the trolley goes on by itself down the hill, and nobody knows it until it jumps the track, because it has to make a turn and then another turn to go into Syracuse. It jumps the track and crashes into a tree right across from Grace Church, where the People's Hospital used to be, which is lucky because a lot of doctors worked in that hospital, so they could immediately come out and
I was born in People's Hospital.
oh, okay. But you know what I mean? It's still there, People's Hospital.
Yes, it is. But it's not a hospital.
I know. But luckily for the people on the trolley, it was a hospital. They came up because everybody on the trolley was injured.
What's,
And when,
what's the street? What's the address of it?
it's the corner, it's where the Grace Street Church is.
Is that Delaware Street?
Delaware, yeah, Grace and Delaware, yeah. At that corner, the trolley made a turn down the hill, and then another sharp turn, and actually another turn to come into the city. It ends up at Clinton Square in Syracuse. But at that intersection, we have the, I don't know what church it is, the Red Brick Church, and then across the street, there's an old turret house. It used to be the People's Hospital, and that's where the accident occurred. Delaware Baptist, that sounds right. I only remember because I used to work the city directory, and I used to sit on the steps and drink my soda. That was my rest stop for the city directory. And it was weird because I didn't know there was the People's Hospital across the street. I actually had to do that building for the city directory. And it's funny how things turn out that, that has something to do with Split Rock. That was before I really started doing research. Those are my college days. But this is looking towards the city. This is looking eastward toward the city. This is on Duggan Boulevard now. Actually, they call it Gulf Road. Gulf Road used to be right up against the company houses. There used to be a separate dirt road that zigzagged over to Onondaga Road, but the people wanted more of a driveway, so they filled in this road with lawn, and this became, which was Onondaga Boulevard, became Gulf Road. So it's very confusing. The road names change. But these are some of the trolleys, and this is summer. You can see they have nice curtains here. And it's a bad photograph. This is from Onondaga Historical Association. But they started out with 2 trolleys. When it becomes an explosive factory, they would have basically 5 trolleys there. One of the sad stories about the trolleys, there's a double track, like you see in here, there's a double track. The manager of the stone crusher I just showed you, his name was O'Hara. He was trying to catch a train, I think it was 1906 or 1908, he was trying to catch a train. He was running along the tracks a little bit further back to the west. He was running along this track to get to the station to catch the train. There was no set pattern to how the trains, or I should call them trains, the trolleys, how the interurbans use these tracks. Sometimes they would use this track to go to Syracuse, sometimes they would use this track. It didn't make sense what track they were on. Well, he thought the interurbans were using this track, so he was running along this track towards this station to catch the trolley. Well, the trolley came up on them, and they're quiet, and they're running about 60 miles an hour. The motorman of the trolley sees them, says, well, what the heck is that guy doing on my track? So he ran him down. He never, blew his horn or rang his bell. He said, well, the guy shouldn't have been there. He knew better, So he ended up dying. So, but that's Split Rock. It's very, very cold-blooded kind of a thing. These were hard-working people. I can't say enough about these people. Yeah, they had their problems. They had their little, foils and stuff, but they were all hard-working people. So this shows, they get off the trolley and these are men going up the hill. Again, it's a bad picture, but it's the only one available showing the men going up to the quarry. Now this shows more of the quarry. Now, this is actually the Shanahan quarry. You can see they put up these lights because these men are only supposed to work 16 hours a day. I forgot the wage. I think they were making $1.50. They struck in 1902 to get $1.75. They didn't get it. A lot of them got fired. A lot of them went back to the coal mines in Pennsylvania because basically these men are creating stone by blasting. So they're all expert dynamiters. Here's a close-up of a wheelbarrow. So these are all hard-working men. And the thing is, these men drink a lot. I mean, these poor guys, there are 7 saloons up at Split Rock, which isn't bad. I thought that was a lot, but Village of Solvay had 25. So these guys were typically sober, but a lot of them made the mistake of, now they got a trolley, now they go downtown, and it could be a weeknight or a Saturday night, and they get drunk and they spend the night in jail. And I was going to tell more of those stories. I kind of kept them out because there's so many guys that got drunk. I mean, there was Byron Filer. He had a very unusual accident. He got drunk and ran into a train down at Clinton Square and didn't realize it, and the train was carrying him on the cow catcher. But they finally realized, there was somebody on the cow catcher because they saw this broken wagon, and they stopped and got him off. Some of them, there's descriptions of the men in jail. And these are hardworking men. You got to realize they have nothing else to do.
Well, it was a drug of choice.
Yes, but it was cheap, and they didn't harm anybody. I mean, they more or less harmed themselves because there were an awful lot of things that happened, especially around Christmas time. I can't remember all the names because they happen so frequently up there. But one Christmas Eve, they worked Christmas Eve. They didn't get any extra time off for Christmas Eve. And one poor Christmas Eve, and they call him in the paper, he's Polish. I'll use the other word they use, Polander, but they typically use the other word. I'm part Polish and Italian. And if any group they pick on, it's the Polish and the Italian. The Italians are a little bit better. They just put in quotes, Italian, They don't come up with the dirty words, but they're in the paper. You'll see other stories in the paper about the names they call each other. But one Christmas Eve, this poor Polander is trying to get some stone out from a ledge, typically something like this ledge here, and a boulder fell on him and crushed his head, but they did bury the parts they could get back. They couldn't find his head, but they buried the other parts. Yeah, that's one of the better stories. The best story is, it wasn't Christmas Eve, it was August. They were blasting stone, and typically the men they had a little shack they could stay in to eat their food. They brought their food there. They didn't have a restaurant. The men would stay in the shack, and the Italian would go out and set the blast charge, and they would blow the charges while the men were at lunch. Well, one day, the men come back early, there's not a red flag set out, so they come back, it's supposed to be safe. A blast goes off, the men were told at the last second, run, get out of the way, and this poor guy, his name was Zibelinski. Now, there are 35 different nationalities up at Split Rock. There's Hungarians, there's Greeks, there's Italians, Poles, there's Irish, I'm sorry, those are up there, and they're all controlled by New Englanders, who, if you read the book, you understand that I don't really have any love for them. But this poor guy, his name is Zibelinski, he runs, and he gets like 1,000 feet away, he's standing by the train, and I'll show you the trains a little bit later on, and a rock falls on him. He has his hand up like this, a rock falls on him, he loses the use of his right arm. So there's a big trial against Solvay Process because they didn't have workers' comp, they didn't have any insurance. So this poor guy has to go through this 2-year trial, you know, it goes back and forth, and it's appealed and all this. But the key of the trial was to collect any compensation back then, you had to be under the supervision of a foreman. So they didn't have a foreman. What they had was Thomas Manley, who was a so-called foreman. He wasn't really a foreman. All he did was hire people, tell them what to do, and fire them. He wasn't a foreman. He had no control over the people. And this is what the company said, Solvay Process, because they treated these people, they always called them the foreigners at Split Rock, always foreigners. They treated these people like garbage. And so it all works out until the president of Solvay Process shows up, Frederick Hazard, and he says, oh, that's my foreman, Thomas Manley. Well, that kind of hurts the case for him. Then they try to say, well, the man wasn't really disabled. He just couldn't use his right arm. So they have this Dr. Topman come down, who becomes health officer for the county later on. He also, at the time though, he was the Solvay Process company physician. To give you an idea of Dr. Topman's ability, when the Spanish influenza hit in 1919, he said it was just a grip, nothing to worry about. That's how good a doctor he was. But he comes on and he asks, well, can this man work? Oh, sure, he's got a good left hand. He can plow fields, he can do anything. And then the defense attorney asks him, would you hire him? Hell no, I hired somebody with 2 good hands. So the guy wins his case. He wins $2,000 for losing the use of his arm for life. But this is the kind of roughness at the quarries. But this shows you basic operation. These are actually the buckets that they'll use on the cable road to carry the stone, the things that we saw flying in the air. They actually have little tracks going through the quarries, and they have the buckets on these wheeled contraptions. They fill them up, and then when they get to what they call the terminal, which is this building here, these wagons go into here, they hook them to the cable line, they rise into the air, and then they actually can come out the other side. You really can't see it well in here, but these are the base, this is the beginning of the bucket line going over to the stone crusher. And you'll see other things I don't point out. There's guys with hand drills. You'll see here's a steam drill. Later on they use electric. You can see a lot of tracks going around, but these are all pulled by horses. And this shows you what the terminals look like. These buckets came in on those wheeled vehicles. They hook them up to the cable here, and then the stone's carried over to the stone crusher, and then it's crushed, loaded into even bigger, and I'll show you later, loaded into even bigger buckets and taken over the Solvay Process. And it's all operated. It got handles here to kind of help push the stone over to dump it into the crusher. Unfortunately, they don't have any pictures of them actually dump it into the crusher of the stone crusher. And this gives you an idea of how much work they had to do just to get to the stone. This is an engine just to scrape the earth off the quarry floor so they can get to the stone. So they got a steam engine and it's pulled along by a scraper here, and it actually has a conveyor belt here, dump it into the wagons as they line up. And this is a view from the other side. So you see, here's the scraper, grabs the dirt, dumps it into the bucket, into the wagon, so it can be hauled off and they can get to the stone and start quarrying. Later on, Solvay Process is always very inventive. They said, well, it's faster if we use steam shovels. So they built steam shovels, and then they bring in trains. Now here's one of the old traction engines still here, but now they're getting rid of the overburden, the dirt, and they're getting to the stone and loaded into trains. And this is one of the trains. Here's one of the steam engines. This is winter because they have sides on it. These trains come from the Manhattan Elevator Railroad. When the Manhattan Railroad went to electric subways, Solvay Process saw a good deal and they bought up these little steam engines. And they realized, well, this is the way to quarry. And this is how they end up going to Janesville, because basically they run out of the stone they want. It's not economical for Split Rock is just a small quarry compared to Janesville. So then they go over to Janesville, and then when they actually buy it from the people there. And of course, that's where the operation moves to after they close at Split Rock. This shows another one of the steam shovels. I mean, these were huge machines. This is summer because there aren't any sides on it. These didn't have any traction. They were just pulled in there by locomotive. These rails, they just move. You can see how temporary they are. There aren't too many ties here. They just move these rails wherever they need them, get to the stone, dump it into the stone cars. But for the overburden, the dirt, they have to create, there's a lot of stone they can't use for the process. So what they do is they have these big piles up at Split Rock, and they still exist today, where they dump the stone that they can't use. And they have engines pulling the stone up to these piles. You can see here, here's two engines. They pull them up to these piles, they go higher and higher in the quarries. And then this is overburden. This is dirt being dumped out. They have these side dumping cars. These again are the Manhattan engines. So they dump the stone, and then to clear the tracks, they have the engines pushing these plows to keep the dirt off the tracks. So they've become very innovative, but they also realize, and here's another picture of the cars being loaded. Here's the train, and then there's these empty side dumping cars here. But they realize, you know, and here's some of the temporary tracks. But they realize, you know, they have to move out. They realize by 1909 they're going to have to leave Split Rock, and they pick another quarry, Janesville, and that most people are familiar with it. You can see these are coal burning trains. Here's the coal ashes as it goes along. Again, here's another drill up here, because they have to drill to set the blasting charges to blow away the ledge of stone. And then here's a nice close-up of the train pulling stone. Now this stone will end up going to the commercial crusher, because there's a lot of stone they can't use for the process, but they get into the gravel business. Basically, they start paving roads with crushed stone. This is before tar. They actually have a process of layering down stone to create good quality roads. So now this stone is going to a new crusher that they built in 1908. This is the crusher mechanism. This is what they call a tipple. These cars here will go into this tipple. It will rotate and actually dump the stone into the commercial stone crusher. To give you an idea how big these crushers are, here are the crushers. The tipple will be above this. They dump the stone into here, and to give you an idea, here's the size. Here's a man standing here. There's actually another man up here, peeking over the ledge there. You can see there aren't really any guardrails or anything. It's, you know, this guy could very well fall. But they have two engines here, and this is to create smaller stone for their gravel business. They also use the stone as aggregate and concrete foundations, and it becomes just as profitable as the soda ash operation. This shows the building they put over those machinery. Here's the full cars, full of stone, going into the mechanism. The tip will turn them over, dump the stone, and then by gravity, they will roll out this side. Now you also see the other stone crusher for the Solvay process is right along here. The buckets are still moving into that crusher. And you can see another view of that. Here's the commercial stone crusher. Here's the bucket lines going into the 1903 crusher. You can barely see it. Here's more conveyor belts. They build more conveyor belts to carry the stone out into the yards. Because basically they wanted to always have an excess supply. They didn't want to ever run out of stone. Plus they were having some strikes at the time, 1902. So they wanted to kind of bank their stone just in case they needed, stone when, the workers were on strike. This gives you a faraway view. This is the commercial stone crusher. Here's the 1903 crusher that we're more familiar with. As I said, the foundation still exists today. It's just this little piece down here. Telephone lines. And you can see this used to be the quarry world the Erie Canal stone came out of. You can see pretty much it's not being used anymore. Now it's really machine operation. They're not using this quarry anymore for stone. They've gone into the western quarries. This also shows another view. These are lilac bushes which existed up to maybe 20 years ago. They're still there and they used to bloom every spring. Beautiful lilacs. The company tried to make it pleasant. They also had a bicycle route. You could come through the quarries while it was in operation, ride your bicycle through, and then go out, go halfway through it, take a left, and you go out to Split Rock Road where Wright Road is now. And it was recommended, for all kinds of people, men and women. And you can see the quarries in operation. Also, they used to take school children up here to show them the operation. And they would
What
come-
road now?
the bicycle route would go up to the middle of the quarry, sort of where the smokestack used to be, and they would take a left and they go out to Wright Road. That
What
little
road?
Wright Road, yeah, that little lane that's near the Old Rock Inn. They would go up that way where the post
Okay.
office
All
was,
right.
and then they would go on Split Rock Road, and then they go to Casson, and then they could go down to Camillus, and then make a
I
round
never
trip.
knew what the name of that road was.
Oh, yeah, it's Wright Road, but
Yeah.
it's,
Okay.
it's WRIGHT, not like right and left. I always take a right to get onto it, but the old, and I don't have, it was in the earlier pictures, the post office used to sit on that corner on the, it would be the northwest corner was a post office, and it wasn't very big. And as they said, the lady who ran it, Mrs. O'Connor, and O'Connor is one of the names of the quarry people. She wasn't a big woman, but she had a hard time turning around in it. It was so small, it was like an outhouse. And that was the Split Rock post office for a while. But most of the post offices were in the stores. There was the Stone Store, which is somewhere east of the King House or Romano House. And then Reagan moved his store to the building that's across from the Old Rock Inn, which is under construction now. That's where the robbery occurred in 1907. And that'll go into personal stories. There are many personal stories about the quarries. And it'll probably offend people. You gotta come and see if your family's mentioned. Again, this is pretty much the quarry when it's finished. I mean, the stone crusher, so you can see more conveyor belts. This is what we saw earlier. Now they have them going out all over the quarry. So it's very hard to get through the quarry. That's why they have a tunnel under the stone crusher that actually goes from the stone crusher to the commercial crusher, so they can walk underneath these piles of stone. And again, this thing here, these are pipelines to bring the steam into the stone crusher. But also on the back of the crusher, now they also have a ramp, because even though they're still using the bucket line to take in stone to the 1903 crusher for the Solvay process ash, now they're also bringing in trains coming in the back. They have a ramp to bring the stone cars up into the crusher and dump them. And this is when they realize, this is a lot of work. It's so isolated. The bucket line, and I'll show you, the bucket line keeps breaking down. That's when they decide we're going to close it. They actually ended up ended up closing it on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1911, and they started Janesville January 1. And of course, they had that factory, or that stone crusher, already completed in operation by the time they moved. They never moved from one place to the other until they had everything secured. But just to show you what the, end this up, I just want to show you the Split Rock Cable Roll. It's actually a separate company, and though it was a separate company, the same officers of Solvay Process and Solvay are also the officers of the Split Rock Cable Roll Company. And one of the things they don't show is totally pipeline. Those are the same officers. They just took different positions. And this shows the buckets. These are a little bit bigger than the ones they use in the quarry. These are the towers. There's ladders on each one. This shows, looking back, this is actually showing going to Solvay. The loaded buckets, it went counterclockwise. The loaded buckets are on the south side of the bucket line, and the empties come back on the other side. And it basically, all it is a line that the pulleys ride on, and then there's a traction line that's hooked to each bucket to pull it along.
It goes through a tunnel too.
Yeah, well, see, after a while, they realize this breaks down too much. And here, you're looking back towards Split Rock. Here's the loaded buckets, here's the empties. And these are like the bravest people I know, because these buckets don't have coverings, and stone used to fall on people and horses and things. When it went over like Genesee Street, they had a net to catch the stone. Not really to minimize lawsuits, but they didn't want to lose their stone. So, it's very important. They needed everything. They were hauling like 750 tons of stone a day for the Solvay process, and then they couldn't get enough. They needed 900 tons. That's why they started using the other quarries. This shows the bucket line, and you can see Solvay process smoke in the background here. Again, yeah, the lake's back there, pristine lake, and these towers were painted with, I actually met a guy that painted these towers before he joined the New York Central Railroad for 40 years. He painted with creosote. That was the color. So it was a preservative, just like railroad ties. Like ours, they have telephone lines. They have ladders on each one of these things to go up in case of accidents like this. And these happen quite frequently. And of course, when this happened, Solvay Process couldn't get their stone, and it caused delays. But what happens later on, they built a stone yard on Milton Ave as a backup for stone, because these things would happen too much. This is why they wanted to get out of Split Rock, is things like this cause delays, and delays cost money. But they got the idea that for a while, for 1908 to 1911, instead of having the cable line go over this hill at Jerome, which is between Terry and what used to be the Solvay High School, they would reduce the tension and put buckets through a tunnel. And this increased the load from, I think, 750 tons to 900 tons, because now they could put in more stone into the buckets. And this is showing the building. They actually cut, what was shown here, they actually cut a trench through the hill, put up these wooden forms, and then poured the tunnel over it, and then refilled the space, put the dirt back. So here you have the buckets still going over the top, and here's the tunnel, which still exists to this day. And then still, as always, they didn't stop one operation until the other was in readiness. So here's the buckets coming over, here's the tunnel. And then here, finally, to get the buckets through the tunnel, so here's a loaded bucket coming through. And basically, somebody went through and scrapped all this way long ago, probably in the 30s, when the depression hit. All this metal work is gone, except for these things here, which I think are embedded into the concrete. Now, at the end of the line, the bucket's coming. This is Milton Ave. Split Rock is to the left. They're coming over, and you see one of these coverings to keep the stone from falling out and hitting trolleys and stuff. So these are the kind of things they had over the major roads. And this is before they started, Solvay, the village of Solvay got the first paved, what they call paved roads. They're basically just coverings of stone. They got the first stone roads because mainly the president of Solvay Process was Frederick Hazard, who also was the mayor of the village of Solvay. So he got the village to pave all their roads. And this is the end of the line. This is Solvay Process, the Solvay ash operations back here. These are some of the men. And these guys would fall off. You know, they do have a railing, but there's like a big hole over on this side.
What year did that cease operation?
They actually, the bucket line for Split Rock, the stone operation, ended the day of the quarry stop, December 31st, 1911. But the bucket line wasn't dismantled to 1922. So the question is, how long was the bucket line in 1922 when they dismantled it? Because one of the problems with Split Rock, when it becomes an explosive factory, they have all this waste. So they might have used the bucket line to carry the waste. The other thing they could have done with the waste is they couldn't transport explosives through Syracuse, but they could transport waste. And so they could have used the tri-line, which connected with the piles along Onondaga Lake, and they could have carried the stone out that way. But they didn't discontinue the bucket line operation to 1922. And they basically said in 1922, the reason they discontinued the bucket line was because of the recent closure of Split Rock. Well, the recent closure was the explosive factory. So somehow this is involved with carrying out waste. Because all the waste from the explosive factory, as well as the waste from the soda ash operation, accidentally landed in Onondaga Lake. So, yeah. But the company always said, they're very proud, they said, it only kills fish, it doesn't hurt humans. So it's really okay. And that's really the end of that.